I want to continue on this privileged white male global domination kind of segment that I've accumulated on my podcast. All right. I want to expand this. I want to go deeper. I want to get in there and really just reach the very, very, very bottom of this privileged white male global dominating ocean. I want to dive really, really deep into this and take it seriously, honestly, because the previous episodes have been me kind of just getting to the root of my own internal feelings about this. But now I want to come at it from a more enlightened and well thought out perspective, because I had time to sit on it, had time to think about it, had time to cry about it. And now, what the fuck am I going to actually do about this topic that seems to be so important to me? Okay, so last night I had my headphones on and I literally had Wolves by Kanye West on repeat. That song, I genuinely think has a mind of its own. It is playing at all different times of the day in my head, and it's the only song too. I cannot get it out of my head. It's playing it has its own force or something. It has its own willpower. So last night I had that in my head, and I was just listening to it over and over and over again, and my soul was just eating it alive, the song. And I started writing kind of an outline of my thought process of where I want to take this discussion about privileged white male global domination and what is a much more mature and conscious, I guess, way that I can go about it. I started writing all these things in my Google Docs about the questions, mainly the questions that I really want answered about the privileged white male. I realized that I want to be more specific about the audience, I guess, for this portion of the segment and who it is that I'm really trying to get to. And in all honesty, it is privileged white males that aim to practice humanitarianism. I think it's important to state that. It's important to be clear. It's important to be intentional and precise and certain, to make sure that everything can be received the way that I am sending it out. And I was going to try to start all over and just scrap all of my previous episodes where you can clearly tell I was reacting emotionally and I was responding in a way that sounded like a angry brown girl who cares so much about the world and has her own humanitarian kind of calling, and clearly she's struggling with it. Clearly she feels all of these kind of things, right? Coming from a very, very, very dark space within myself in the beginning. And so I realized that there really is a way that I can take this and talk about it and discuss it and really do what it is that I'm ultimately trying to do. And I think that, there's this example that people use when you're doing something creatively and you kind of have to get out all of the bad stuff before you get to the good stuff. And it's when you turn on a faucet or something and all the brown water comes and you wait for it to go clear. That's this moment. The water's clear now. And so if you listen to any of my episodes before this one, then you will hear all of the sadness and hatred and confusion and just all of that come out of me when I'm talking about this topic. And I decided not to scrap that and to still post it because I want to be my original self. I don't want to strip myself of my originality, and I also don't want to strip myself of being human and showing emotions and raising an awareness on how it really does feel to be a brown girl who cares about all, loves all, is connected to this concept of humanitarianism and practices oneness daily. with my environment and does everything in my power, like studying, meditating, journaling, examining, freaking cleansing, everything, like to make sure that I am contributing all of the knowledge and all of my most high qualities to help the world heal. So my angle when coming at these questions, and what I'm beginning to understand the reasoning behind my desire to discuss this topic, is really that I want to focus, or more like bring into the light, the mental, emotional, and spiritual state of being of a privileged white male, and how the health of his mind, his emotional self, and his spiritual self, like how does the health of his being impact who he is and the way that he desires or he aims to practice humanitarianism. And it's more so like going from a oh me versus them type of thing, and seeing us as opposing forces. I want to kind of like mend this gap. I kind of want to, like, you know, connect in a different way, in a more enlightened way, in a higher way, that focuses on a common goal, which is healing the world, as opposed to just saying all of my really mean thoughts about privileged white males and systematic oppression and how I think they could have something to do with it and yada yada yada. Like, the whole point is that I want to get myself out of the way, and I don't want this to be about me, but the success that is achieved in this sort of journey towards healing the world, right? So I realized that what I more so want to play, the role that I want to play in this discussion of privileged white male global domination, is a conscience. That's the role that I kind of want to take on here, and to almost help him reconnect to the voice of his own conscience, as opposed to having any external voices or any lower vibrational version of his self impact his judgment and his ability to be of service to justice in a way that benefits the highest good. It's a big tower moment. Like, the tower comes crashing and lightning strikes the tower and everything just goes just in a way that is completely unpredictable. And from then you kind of have to like reconnect to the source. And that's kind of where I am, that reconnection. So back to the questions. Okay. The questions that I came up with last night while I was listening to Wolves by Kanye West on repeat are: in what ways does the privileged white male experience systematic oppression? How does the perception of his environment impact which beliefs he chooses to impress onto his subconscious for creating his self-image? How does his moral standards influence the path he takes towards fulfilling a humanitarian role in society? Is there a way for a privileged white male to practice humanitarianism that promotes a healthy relationship between himself and his environment? How does a privileged white male maintain an awareness of his own mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being while practicing humanitarianism? In what ways does society's opinions, expectations, and assumptions about privileged white males generate a fixed approach to the use of privilege in the world? What are the types of thought patterns that contribute to systemic racism, racial injustice, and inequality? Okay. And I have these definitions like that I kind of want to just express for transparency. I want to be transparent and honest about the way that my mind is moving, and so that when I say words that I can clearly be again kind of received in the way that I am portraying. Systematic oppression. I found this definition from nationalequityproject.org, and it said, the lens of systemic oppression is a lens we intentionally employ to sharpen our focus on the ways in which any given form of oppression may be negatively impacting people's ability to make progress on the things they care about, and or preventing individual or collective action towards the achievement of a particular goal. And then I found this definition for humanitarianism, sort of like two. One is Wikipedia, which I know everybody has their feelings about Wikipedia, but it resonates compared to any other definition. Wikipedia and this other source called phap.org. So it says humanitarianism, this is the one from Wikipedia. Humanitarianism is an active belief in the value of human life, whereby humans practice benevolent treatment and provide assistance to other humans to reduce suffering and improve the conditions of humanity for moral, altruistic, and emotional reasons. And then the other one kind of explains humanitarianism as a systemic response to crisis. That really stood out. And then the very last one is morality, which I got from gfgc.kar.nic.in. I don't know. It was a PDF. And it says, morals are judgments, standards, and rules of good conduct in the society. All right. So this is where my brain is sort of going with this. And it is also where I feel like I'm being guided to encourage this discussion of this topic to go, so that it is much more productive and progressive than just saying my own individual opinions about it or what the world may think about it or this, that, and the third, but really kind of creating an actual blueprint for the way that this discussion alone can dramatically increase the permanent change that is made in society, especially when it comes to this concept of a privileged white male. And I started thinking even deeper last night, which is probably why I'm again feeling kind of wonky. I've been using my brain like like it's not human. I've been but this happens to me, like my mind goes 1,000 thoughts per second, and I start downloading a lot of information, and I start consuming a lot of information, and yeah, it's a whole process. But I started thinking about the definition of humanitarianism, and even though I just expressed it from one of the sources, I kind of came up with my own definition last night that I feel as though is a much more accurate expression of the calling, because I kind of view humanitarianism as a calling. Well, I've evolved into viewing it as a calling and what the calling actually asks, like how the role of being a humanitarian is intended to be fulfilled according to the most high definition. All right, so what I came to the conclusion of is that practicing humanitarianism is, in the most simple way, I would say, an embrace of all that makes us human. But in a more complex way, it is an expression of a feeling of unity and oneness that eliminates the use of the physical world to define the self or the soul. And I started thinking about how I've been practicing humanitarianism, and how not even just the practice of humanitarianism, but my way of life. like me practicing Taoism, how that has, or Taoism, how that has completely and drastically altered my entire perception of everything that I have ever come into contact with. And I began to sort of see humanitarianism as a disciplinary way of life. And again, in other words, it's intended to restore the human's ability to connect to a source of life directly, and to also liberate the brain from enslavement of its physical world. Why I say it, I began to view it as a disciplinary action because I started thinking about this concept of a privileged white male, right? And all of the ways that he aims to practice humanitarianism. And you will see a lot of them use their money, use their fame. They will use their platforms, everything that does not include them being a human being, right? And getting even deeper to it, when I started to think about what experience could a privileged white male have in his own reality that would actually sort of fuel this desire to fulfill a humanitarian role in his life. And I started to think about this concept of empathy, especially when you are a privileged white male and you are gifted with this ability to be empathetic. What I learned is that he ends up sharing the pain of someone who is suffering, but not the cause, if that makes sense. It's like you end up feeling connected, you end up sharing someone else's pain, but not their experience. And this makes it really hard. If I'm being honest, I want to say for him to be able to communicate his empathy and the oneness and the connectedness that he really does feel to the world that he lives in a way that shows his humanity. Okay? I started to think about how it's likely that he will donate like a large lump sum of money to show how much he cares, or he will, I don't know, set up a charity, set up a foundation. You know, he will do something that manipulates his physical world, and then he will create a sort of channel that makes a hole in his reality. And through this hole, he like puts a tube from his physical world to the world that is on the outside of him. And what he feeds this tube is all of his material abundance, right? So he feeds all this materialistic kind of energy into this tube out into the world. But that is the thing. Anything that you use to identify yourself that is materialistic, and anything that you use to define your love, which is materialistic, does not make you human. And it isn't a accurate representation of your heart. If I'm being honest, it is not, and it is not, right? And in the previous episodes, I talked about how society will engrave it. And, you know, like when I was in the bath this morning, I started to think about how this could even be deeper than just society, but this could also be his friends. This could be his parents. This could be his lover, like telling him and encouraging, more so the encouraging him to use his resources, use all of his materialistic abundance to fulfill this humanitarian role. And in a way support the use of his physical possessions, support the use of his physical world to express his feeling of oneness and unity. And I just think that that is very, very, it is a very unhealthy way of thinking, and it is the thought of your most low self, okay? The lowest conscious version of you, okay? Like, that is experiencing the least amount of worth, right? It is their thought patterns that encourage and influence the use of your money or your possessions that are physical, anything that you own that exists in your material plane, right? Like, you using any of this at all, it is the lowest vibrational self that believes these things can be used to fulfill a humanitarian role. Straight up. And that if you are experiencing darkness and you are experiencing this sadness and this sort of inability to sustain a kind of stable mental, emotional, and spiritual health, it is 100% because you are using a part of you which is physical to express your humanity. And I began to think about this concept of self-mastery, and also how I was saying that these privileged white males who are like called to practice humanitarianism, for instance, like Sean, I realized that the goal of being a humanitarian is, again, sort of linked to this concept of purification and how that can be achieved through inaction, and how when you put this goal of purifying and this technique of inaction together, it manifests an expression of true unity. If I'm being honest, true unity, because what really connects, someone who's being a humanitarian and is also a privileged white male, and somebody who is experiencing suffering and pain or some kind of injustice or inequality or just some kind of crisis in their life, right? What they are both, like the common struggle, what is really causing both of their pains, right? What is really connecting them. Again, going back to how I was saying that they share the pain, but not the same experience that's causing the pain, right? In reality, the cause is their belief system, and this system keeping them enslaved to their own body and their own world and their own environment. Because a privileged white male, from my understanding, my own gifted wisdom and knowledge and lessons learned, I feel like as a privileged white male, his entire life, right? Like, especially when he is walking down this path of humanitarianism, what is actually asked of him, right, is that he masters this concept of an action, because it is almost in a way programmed into the world he lives in, and also programmed into him that because he is gifted with material abundance, that this makes his experience better than someone else's, that he is more gifted, that he is blessed, and that because he has all this material abundance, right, like it should be used to spread across the globe, and it should be used to help systemic crisis and help people in their times of need, right? Like, but again, this is stemming from the belief that what he's going through is somehow better, that there's a force, that nature, God, the universe, okay, has gifted him with more blessings and has given him a much more ideal experience of reality than someone else who doesn't have any of the privilege or material abundance that he has. But that's the problem in our thinking as a society, as a world, as human beings, is that we think just because somebody has material abundance, that there is a force somewhere that is doing that on purpose or without a greater intention. Like, it is on purpose, but not like, I think human beings are enslaved to the material world in that they believe that that is where their value is, and that they believe that their physical world at all can be used to express their life and the meaning that they find in their life. Because one of the most sacred understandings that I have come to about my own experience of my universe and my own experience of who I am is that the physical realm is the lowest, yet the most powerful experience that we have of ourselves. And that everyone is intended, especially when you are a privileged white male, it is intended that you master, listen, the version of yourself that expresses in a way that applies force, push, pull, or manipulation to your material world, right? That if you are using your material experience or your material abundance or any of your possessions or anything that you own on the physical plane, right, then you are 100% living at a very, very, very low vibrational state. And that in no way are you actually succeeding in answering a higher calling. You are literally being enslaved to your reality, and you aren't making any real success or any real progress so long as you are using your money or any of your fame or any of your gifted abundance to express your feeling of oneness with your world. Because I kind of go back to what I was saying before. This person, right, that you are trying to help in their suffering, they're going through the exact same lesson that you are going through. Even though yours appears to be material abundance, right, and theirs may appear to be some sort of absence, right, of abundance, or absence of a force that's working for their highest good, right? And you have to understand that if you really want to contribute to the world and you really want to help heal that person's suffering, you will not present yourself in a humanitarian role through the use of any of your materialistic abundance, because the part of you that they really need is the part that is able to connect to a source of life within. That really the whole point of this humanitarian thing is to emphasize the oneness and the unity, right? The fact that you guys are having two completely different experiences, yet you share a similar pain, yet you are both going through the same kind of darkness by looking at your world and feeling powerless to it, or not understanding what any of it means. Confusion. Why is this happening? Why is that happening? Like, all of this is common. And again, it makes me think about like Sean, and when I see him in the world, and he gives like such large lump sums of money, or he will, and it's not just Sean, this is like a lot of white privileged males who are dominating the globe, right? Like, my kind of subject is just Sean, because that's who I've been researching, who I've been studying, who I've been observing. And when I look at him, like, I see where the failure comes from, like why he feels like a failure. And it's because in some ways he is failing to understand the call of humanitarianism, in that I've come to understand that it is also possible he does not have the necessary guidance in his life, or like someone who is also fulfilling a humanitarian role that is providing him with assistance on the way he shows his care, the way he shows his heart, the way he expresses this part of himself that feels empathy. And do you want to know something? Is that I genuinely feel like empathy is a talent. Like, I feel like the human being and the way it views gifts and like abilities is so limited. Empathy within itself is a talent, and he has so many talents, right? Like, he can sing, he can act, he can be this beautiful man and do all this, artistic stuff. But I feel like a talent that isn't fully harnessed at its highest potential that I feel like Sean has is empathy. And I think that the expression of this empathy is not successful, or more like the way his empathy is shown kind of equates to a failure to understand what the whole point of him having the talent is, right? And the reason that we have talents are so that we can help the world, that we play a role in the world. And I feel like his talent of empathy isn't, again, harnessed in a way that expresses its full potential, because it is for some reason chained and bound to this material abundance that he has. And it manifests a failure to present empathy as a talent, because he isn't using the part of him that is empathetic to express, or he isn't expressing his empathy in a way that shows a true sense of oneness between himself and the world, because he's using his experience and his divinely gifted experience. Like, he's using his material plane in order to express a part of himself that is legitimately invisible and intangible. It doesn't even exist really on any plane. This empathy, right? And this talent that, again, is sort of one of those things that are intangible. It is genuinely a psychic ability. Like, it is a psychic ability, period. I don't care. Like, you cannot try to use your psychic sort of talent, by defining it or exploiting it by giving it a worth of your money, giving it a worth of your fame, or giving it a worth of this or that. If it's anything that I feel like people really need to gain from somebody like Sean, is the fact that even though their physical worlds look completely different, that they 100% have the exact same connection to life, that there is something that connects them that does not involve any of their physical worlds. And this is kind of going back to what I was saying when I said one of the most high understandings that I've come to is that the physical world within itself is sacred. I genuinely believe that it is very much so. The only words I can come up with is dangerous and destructive and really evil. I think evil is the manipulation of the material world. I think evil is the exchange of materialism Like, it is the exchange of material energy that creates this concept of evil, because this is the enslavement, right? You are in alignment with the self. That's why I said it's a lower vibrational self. This lower vibrational self that uses the material realm to express life, right? And uses that to express love. But what it does is that it keeps the mind controlled by the body. And that within itself is impure, period, because it promotes a world where the true nature of reality is enslavement. It also keeps the laws of nature hidden, right? It stems from this sort of desire to keep an individual's power from them, and to also keep the power from nature, right? Like, it is literally to keep a human from its nature, which is to be infinite, to be creative, to have a limitless imagination and the capacity to manifest anything using their own thoughts, that they can legitimately heal themselves just by thinking. But it is hard for a human to be connected to its nature and for the laws of nature to work for the highest good of the human if they're too busy enslaved to the fact that they have a body and that their material world looks a certain way, or that it is in a certain condition, right? And so because this condition exists, that they are powerless to it, and that they have no way to overcome what it is that is in front of them. And that is why I said that the privileged white male who wants to practice humanitarianism, it is for the highest good, right? And it is also in alignment with this concept of good, his morals, right? Him being connected to his nature, allowing all to be connected to nature, and nature being kind of what connects us all. His highest good individually, that it promotes a healthy well-being for him, that it liberates him from enslavement of his own world, and it liberates him from this feeling of being a failure, from feeling worthless, from feeling like his life is equivalent to nothing, right? Or any of these very, very low vibrational and thoughts, like, and low, very self-depreciating experiences of his self. The true nature of his reality is not that he's more blessed, or that he has greater material abundance, or that this privilege is because of systemic racism. We want to believe that. And, you know, like, every person who's a victim of systemic oppression wants to blame the fact that privileged white males have more ability to manipulate the material realm. Like, we want to blame that on systemic oppression and say that because they have more and because they benefit from systemic oppression, then they need to help end it. In reality, I'm going to be 100% honest and express from my most high self and say that that is 100% bullshit, right? The fact that these males are privileged, right? Like, for instance, Sean, him having all of this power, him having all of this privilege has jack shit to do with systemic racism, right? It is the belief that the material realm is the highest, or is expressed as the highest form of life. That is 100% contrary to the way nature exists and how nature brings life into fruition. Like, that's why if a privileged white male does have a lot of material abundance, in reality, that experience is gifted to him, not for anyone to look at it and say, oh, there's a God that blesses people with more, and there's a God that blesses people with less, and this and that. No, what you're doing, number one, is that you are literally taking a experience of the universe, right, and corrupting it with your own internalized oppression, period. Like, to see two people, and I was actually talking about this with my cousin during our beach trip, how we can see someone who has a whole lot of money, right, and has all this fame and this glory and this success, and be like, I want what they have, and why are they more blessed, and why don't I have this, and why this and why that, right? It's like this commonality, this sort of normalized looking at somebody's experience of themselves and then comparing it to your gifts, comparing it to your blessings, comparing it to what it is that you have. And see, if we want to talk about this concept of God, right, I believe that there is no experience of the universe that grants any one individual more or less power than the other, more or less enslavement than the other, more or less opportunity than the other, period. Even when it comes to systemic racism and systemic oppression, right? Like seeing a privileged white male who has a lot of material abundance, and then seeing a brown woman who is experiencing poverty and hunger and oppression and all of these things, and somehow thinking that one of them is having a better experience than the other, or that one of them is gifted with more power or ability than the other. No, not at all. Not at all. Everyone's experience is intended to teach them that the value of their life is equivalent to the self, right? And to teach them that no matter what, they will always be enslaved to their physical world if they express their connection, or they communicate a connection to their world by observing their physical plane or their physical body. And we're talking about spirituality at this point. We're talking about the soul. We're talking about the intangible part of the human, like the mind and the spirit, and even the heart, right? The heart, in a way, is a bit intangible because it is not a part of ourselves that we can physically connect with, if I'm being honest. But it is more of a thing that is intuitive, which is still an aspect of life that is intangible. This concept of an intuition, this concept of an instinct and intelligence, like, in no way is it at all for anyone's highest good to look at someone's experience or to look at their own experience and think that they can heal or that they can help by altering or by using what it is that they have materialistically. And I think that this is really kind of going back to how I was saying I would suggest a privileged white male who desires to practice humanitarianism to really understand this concept of inaction and really give value to his right, if I'm being honest, to say absolutely nothing and to take absolutely no responsibility, because again, this kind of creates an imbalance karmically, right? Like you are acting from your lowest vibrational self if you use any of your materialistic abundance at all to fulfill your humanitarian role, because none of that is what makes you human. And you are intended to ascend, right, into a much higher, much healthier state of mind of becoming a man, right, who does not define his worth or the worth of his world by what it looks like or what is physically present. Because you giving money, like let's say you do give some kind of value, and let's say no matter how big, no matter how small, there is no way that the value you give will actually be equivalent to the worth of those that you are helping. So what good does it do for their highest good and for your highest good to try to use the material world to define a value of a human? And to define the value that you perceive in them. It will always be less. It will always be low. And you know, I'm still studying Aristotle, and he starts saying, like, literally the very first line of book 2 of Politics by Aristotle is, he says, our purpose is to consider what form of political community is best of all for those who are most able to realize their ideal life. Okay, so he's talking about this concept of unity, and here it is. He says, for that which is common to the greatest number has the least care bestowed upon it. And then he says, everyone thinks chiefly of his own, hardly at all of the common interests, and only when he is himself concerned as an individual. Well, that I feel like is sort of exactly what I'm trying to get at, is that something that is almost accepted by the general population 9 times out of 10 is connected to a very low consciousness. And that if we want to really express this concept of unity, right? I'm kind of going back to my own arguments, not really talking about Aristotle anymore. I just wanted to put that in there for the sake of getting my point across. This like mantra that I have, that I say, which is that through the power of an action I experience purification. And I think that as a privileged white male, you really, really, really want to not move from that lower vibrational part of yourself, right? That guy will see his material abundance as power, and he will look at the world that he lives in and he will say, well, I have all this stuff in front of me. I must be having a better experience than someone else. No. Number one, that does not promote your own mental health and your own well-being. Like, when we are talking about self-love here, we're talking about self-care for a privileged white male. In no way does it support your own well-being for you to look at your material abundance and think that you should be using that to manipulate the experiences of others. Manipulation can exist in any form, whether detectable or undetectable, right? But it is like, if you are using your material abundance to manipulate someone else's environment, and when I say that, I mean by like giving them money, by giving them power that they were not gifted naturally, that they were not naturally born with. Okay, this is the nature, right? You want to keep them connected to their nature and you connected to your nature. What we don't want are for human beings to be acting in a way that is contrary to the ordinary course of nature, and nature does not move in terms of the physical world. The physical world will always be complete, and it is the lowest self, right? This concept of evil, really, if I'm being honest, is just an enslaved brain, right? Like a brain that is enslaved to its body and therefore completely violates all of nature's laws, completely tips this karmic justice scale and does not contribute to an experience of love for all. Period. All right, I think that's where I'm gonna end this. I feel so much better because my previous episodes I was really hot, okay? I was just going through it, but I feel so much better. I feel much more like aligned because this is something that really means a lot to me. And like, even though in the past episodes, like I said, I've been going up and down and in and out, like that's just me being a 20-year-old woman who is figuring out the best way she can discover everything that she can about life. Seriously, and feels everything. So, all right, this is the end. Thanks for listening. I'm out.